Welcome, everyone. This is Greg Rock, and on behalf of BPM Institute and Fujitsu, I'd like to welcome you to today's roundtable, Automated Process Discovery, How to Jumpstart BPM Initiatives. We're lucky enough today to have Keith Swenson with us, who's Chief Architect for Fujitsu, and Keith will be updating us on some of the new capabilities that debuted in April around Automated Process Discovery, as well as the other capabilities of Fujitsu in and around business process management. Fujitsu has a long history in this space and an awful lot of capabilities, and so we welcome Keith and his expertise to our audience and our community. As many of you have seen our webcasts previous to this, BPM Institute promotes knowledge sharing and networking amongst our members and the BPM community at large through our website, conference series, training programs, and electronic newsletters. And we welcome you to explore those on our website. Today's format, as I mentioned, will feature Keith Swenson with Fujitsu. Keith also is going to take the time to give us a demo today of the product, and will also be available for Q&A at the end of the presentation. So we look forward to today's session, and I'd like to turn things over to Keith Swenson.
Thank you much, Greg. Today's presentation is about automated process discovery, service offered by Fujitsu, and we think it's a great way to jumpstart your BPM initiative. When you look at businesses and you look at there's a variety of different challenges that they have to face today, and all businesses want to find an effective way to meet these challenges. One of the top priorities that have been found for the last 3 years running is improving business processes. Now notice that these are questions asked to CEOs. And these questions are not exclusively about the IT department and how to make IT better, things like need for revenue growth and improving the effectiveness of the enterprise workforce. But top of the list for 3 years in a row is improving business processes. So we think this is an important field to address in our technology. Now, when you want to automate a business process, you have the standard business process management cycle. This usually starts with modeling a business process, then you do integration with back-end systems, then you do automation, you run the processes itself, you come back, you analyze the process, see how well you've been doing, maybe you do some proposals for some improvements on the processes, you may do some simulation to optimize how the process may run, and finally you come back to modeling and you do the cycle. So business process management is about a continual cycle of improvement. But what we're talking about with our automated process discovery is a slight change to this cycle. It's a way of starting at the analyze step. And we do that by taking information that's already in your organization today that you may not know about. We can actually bring that out, give you a picture of what your processes look like from that, get an understanding of the exceptions that you have to handle and the how you actually can possibly improve those processes, and that then brings you into the model, integrate, automate cycle. So let me show you how that's done. What everybody wants to do is get you from the as-is process to the to-be process. So you start by considering what you think is happening in your organization. Now there's a number of ways that you might find that. First of all, you've got the by the book. That is, you've got the guidelines that your organization has probably written down and probably recorded someplace what is supposed to be done. That's not always what is being done, and there's a variety of good reasons for that. When the procedures were originally written, those procedures may not have taken into account all of the variations that you'll see in reality, and your organization is filled with intelligent people, and those people have adapted those processes to reality, but the problem is they probably haven't gone back and updated the book. So what you have to do then is you have to interview the workers themselves. But there you run into yet another problem, and that is that the workers know how to do the work. They may not know how to explain how they do the work. Or even further, they may actually explain what they think they should be doing, not what they do, but what they think they should be doing. And that may not, in fact, be the best thing, because from their viewpoint, what they think is the best thing to do may not, in fact, from the organization's viewpoint, give you the best process. Anyway, through this process of interviews and collecting of information, you end up with a picture of a process. That may not, in fact, be the actual process. Our approach is a little bit different than this. What we can do is uncover information that's already in your organization and pull out the processes from existing data. And the great thing about this is that it's a true picture of the process from that point of view. It's not somebody's opinion, and it's not affected by how somebody thinks it should be, but it's simply a automatic recording of this was done, then this was done, and this was done, and we can take a look at picture that. We can take a look at how long things are taking, and using what the process really is, we give you a foothold to get to where you want to be, which is the to-be process, the improved process, and continual cycle after that. Well, just to get an idea of what it costs to do process discovery the traditional way, the manual way, it can be actually quite expensive. This is a particular case study of a company that was wanted to automate a revenue recognition process. And it took them 8 weeks. It involved 20 individuals in their company. They hired 3 consultants on site to do this. They went through a 5-week interview process. There was then 3 weeks of analysis and report preparation. And in the end, it cost a lot of money. We went through this ourselves internally, and some of the people in the product group realized that we really should have this information available, and we could mine that information and pull the process out. And the way this works is that you have a business process going on, and so you have a bunch of different people in your organization, and they're doing different things as it goes forward. And all of those different actions are almost always, not 100% of the case, but almost always using some sort of enterprise application. And those enterprise applications almost always make a record, which is retained about what happened. Now, these are not integrated applications. So world would be great if everything was nice and integrated and you could immediately pull this out of everywhere. It's not integrated. These are separate databases. But that's where our technique for process discovery comes in. We can bring the data from these various applications that already exist in your organization and discover the processes from them. The approach looks a little bit like this. On the left, you're seeing event retrieval. So we're uncovering history records in applications, or we're pulling this out of log files from an application. Basically a record of interactions which have happened over time. We bring that in to the BPME technology, and we do the correlation of events across the multiple databases. Once we've correlated the events, we recognize the process patterns. We then sort the processes according to what's most common and least common, and then finally we bring that out and we have our process visualization tool, which allows you to see and explore how your processes were going. Actually, probably the best way to understand this is if I give you a short demonstration of this. Give me a moment here to switch over to the application. So here we have a small application running. Now what this is it's actual customer data from one of our customers who we analyzed their purchase order process. And so what we have in here is about 5,000 cases, that is 5,000 process instances, if you will, of their purchase order processes, tracking 5,000 purchases. Now, here's the process that you get by bringing that information in. Now, this is a very, very straight line process, very simple process, because we're only looking at the 600 most common cases. So this is what we call the sunny day scenario. This is what the process looks like if everything goes right. So everything went through the process and it went great, but we're only looking at 12% of the cases. This little knob over here allows us to include more and more cases. So as I include more cases, I'm getting more of the exceptional cases, so more of the cases that are a little bit more different than that. And you're starting to see that the diagram gets a little bit more complex as we go forward, because now we're starting to include things that don't happen that often. Right now we're looking at about 1,700 cases, and still most of them are traveling down this line down the middle, but there's a couple of outliers. Then if I keep moving this up, it starts to get to be more and more complex. In fact, if I take it all the way to the top, we get basically a mess. And the thing you need to keep in mind here is that this is actual customer data. The reality is not as clean as we would like it to be. The fact is that when you're in a business process, you'd like to think that purchases happen in a very nice, clean way, and we put it in, and it goes to each person in succession. But there's all sorts of exceptions that happen in reality that your process has to respond to. So, for example, you ordered an item, and that item is no longer produced. So you have to go back and you have to handle that. Sometimes the new item that you're replacing with is more expensive, and you have to go back and get approvals. Sometimes somebody rejects it, and it comes back in. So there's a lot of different cases that you need to think about to make your business process be resilient. But you're still seeing the biggest part of this is the thick line down the middle. You're seeing 33,000 cases going this way, 2,700 cases going this way. But there's a number of transitions, and these little numbers mean how many cases went that way. There's a number of them that were just 1, 2, and 3. Well, what's going on there? You'd kind of like to understand why you had a case that went on that particular trajectory when none of the other ones did. Well, you can't understand that by looking at everything jammed together. So we have a different technique for that. Let's go back here and let's dial down the complexity down to something that looks like a pretty reasonable process that we can then use to look at some of these exceptions. Now what I'll do now is choose a single exception out of all of the exceptional cases. Now once again, remember these are actual real cases that we're looking at. So what we see here is the black lines represent the normal cases, and you're still seeing numbers next to them that represent how many cases went that way. The red dashed line, though, is this particular exception, and the number next to that is the sequence in that particular process instance. So, for example, the first has a 1 next to it, and then a 2, and then a 3, and a 4. So we can actually follow the process through the steps and see what it actually did. Now, in this case, this particular process went through this save temporary step, and that's not one of the normal steps. So you might want to ask the question, why wasn't it? Is it something that should be part of the process or not? In this case, I would say save temporary just looks like something that happens that doesn't happen every time, and it's not that important. But look at this. When we get down to this review step here, it looks like it did that about 6 or 7 times. That's almost always an indication of something that could be improved. This process could be made better by, instead of doing the review 6 times, let's figure out how to get, maybe it was reviewed by a bunch of different people until they found the right person. Maybe we could find that person up front and get them to review it once instead of going through all those people. So that's one way that the process could be optimized. Now, I picked just the very first case that came along, but actually when you're looking through these exception cases, you can sort the exceptions in various ways. So here we can sort them according to how often those exceptions appear, how far they deviate from the normal case, what the repetition frequency is about states that get done a lot of times in a row, and then also process return frequency is about cases which go back to earlier steps. We can also look at particular transitions between given states. If there's some particular transition you want to zoom in on, you can go look at that particular instance and find out what happened before and after it. And there's a bunch of other ways that you can go and select exceptional cases. But let's choose it from deviation from the normal case. We'll sort all those this way, and we'll then take a look at one of these on top here. Put that on there. And what do we get? Again, we're seeing black being the underlying case, but and it came through that save temporary. Again, transition 3 is here, but then look at this. Transition 4 goes up to cancel. And then 5 goes to resubmit, okay? And then you see it go on down there, and it goes back up to cancel. And it gets resubmitted, and it's canceled again. So this purchase order was canceled 3 times and resubmitted 3 times. And this is real data. I mean, some people actually did this. You kind of want to know why, and that's clearly something that could be improved. Clearly, if you could do something early on in the process and avoid having to go through this cancel and resubmit so many times. So this gives you an idea of how you can use this technique. Now, this diagram that you're looking at here, this comes directly from the database files, the database log files. We bring those database dumps, actually, is what they are. We're using existing data in your environment. We're not deploying sensors in there, and then you have to wait 6 months and collect the data. We can actually pull from the existing databases. We then do correlation to recognize them, and then as soon as we've recognized the process instances of the cases themselves, you can bring them straight into this tool and visualize it and explore around. There's a number of other ways that you can explore. You can look at time-based analysis. You can search for bottlenecks. You can compare two different displays side by side. But probably the best way to show that at this point is to go back to the slide set because I've got some examples in here that are drawn up, which I think give you an idea of how people have used this in the past. So here we're seeing the big messy plot on the upper left is the actual state transitions from a manufacturing process. And that's what it looks like if you look at all 100% of them. It's a big messy diagram. And again, reality is a little bit messy sometimes. But using this technique of sorting them in order of normal to exceptional, and then we look at 40% of them, we see the diagram down on the lower right. That diagram fell out of the data, and this customer was able to take a look at this data and see that up at the front you're seeing some cycle back, and at the end you're seeing some cycles back. In the middle it's quite a regular process. And from this they were able to actually add a step into the process early up front and avoid those cycle backs. It decreased the cost of the process. It decreased the amount of time it took to build things, and it also, they claim, improved the quality of the product itself. Exception analysis is where you go look at, you pick out particular exceptions and show that with the red lines over the black. Covered that in the demo, so I don't think I need to cover that again right now. Then there's an interesting technique of comparing two data sets side by side. What's happening here is that this is data that came from one company, and they had a number of different branch offices, and they were using all the same software, and they were using the same operation manuals, and they thought they were operating in exactly the same way. But when you mined the data and you looked at the different offices, you found out that one of the offices was, in fact, handling most of the cases from inventory, and the other one was handling half from inventory and half back-ordered. Now, I can't tell you, without knowing the business itself, which of those is the better way to run the business. So then what they need to do is go back and look at those two branches and see which one was actually running better, and possibly implement the same procedures across the whole company. But what they were not even aware that the different branches were operating differently. And so by mining this information out of the data that already exists in that organization, we were able to tell them something about their organization and possibly optimize it right off the bat. We can do time analysis. We can calculate standard deviations and look at the variance of time for particular steps. So some of the methodologies teach us that if the time for doing a certain step is very, very, very consistent, then that's usually an indication of a mature process. But if the deviation is large and it varies all over the place, then there's a possibility of improving that part of the process there. So that's another clue that you can use to look and see how you might improve your business processes. Well, this gives you an idea of the different kinds of customers that we've worked with in order to help them to discover their processes and to optimize their processes. So, you know, food and beverage or finance and a bank. There was an insurance, claims process, energy company, manufacturing. In all cases, they were able to see very significant improvements in their business process through the act of uncovering that process. I mean, when you discover a process in the traditional way, there'll be a lot of people that have opinions on how that process should be. You know, I think it goes this way. Somebody else in the process thinks it goes a different way, and that's because we're not experts at knowing what the process is, and we also are not experts in telling other people about that. But if you draw this out of the data, there's no ego to it. It's you can just say, well, look, here's what it is, and 40% of the cases went this way, and we had a whole bunch more, and we had some of them that did these other bizarre things, and there's no emotions in that, and you can set right about immediately to looking at those processes and saying, well, I can see obvious improvements in that, and it gets you past the what are we doing right directly into the how can we improve this. Now, here's a particular case study that I think you might find kind of interesting, and this was a manufacturing process. So we were able to capture that data and bring it in, and the people that were involved in this process knew the process fairly well, and when they got to that one step between inspection 4 and unit assembly, I looked at that, and I said, that doesn't look right. It's supposed to be 24 hours. They had designed this whole manufacturing process so that they'd have only 24 hours of inventory on the floor at that point, and so they were sure that was too long. What was going on? So through this technique, they took the data out, they analyzed it, and here's what they were able to find out. On the top, you're seeing the what they were expecting to happen, and that is that in this particular part of the process, they've got 3 subunits which are coming together. There's a little bit of pre-processing that needs to be done, and then those subunits are assembled into a bigger unit. And what they found was really happening was that while these parts were coming in at the same time, the pre-processing was not taking the same amount of time. They were taking different amounts of time. So in fact, it was taking 62 hours instead of 24 hours. Now, you might think it would be pretty obvious that to the people on the factory floor that this was not taking 24 hours, but it often is not. A lot of the things that you can uncover through this technique is not at all obvious to those people who can make a difference on that. And so that's one of the great things about this approach, is that it can bring that out. We can show you the pictures and bubble it up, and that can be used basically for immediately turning around and improving processes. In this particular case, they were able to reduce the time almost immediately to 48 hours, from 62 to 48, and then what they did was they started staging the arrival of the subunits to come at different times, so that they all ended up being completed at the same time, and they ended up able to bring it down to the 24 hours ultimately. So it's kind of a insight into the way your organization works that you can draw from the data that you already have. Now, all of this process discovery is really, so far, I've been talking about how we get started with a BPM initiative. So, sure, you want to mine the data, bring it in, you want to discover the processes, understand what the exceptions to the processes are. But then what you do is you bring it into the modeling and the simulation tool in Interstage BPM, and that allows you to draw a picture of the diagram, share it with people, maybe make it improved, make the 2B process there. You can then deploy that into process servers and automate the process, letting people know when things need to be done, or automatically picking up information and distributing it. And then finally, our full analytics capability allows you to track how well your processes are running, telling you how well your organization is running with a real-time dashboard which gives you up-to-date information on exactly how the processes are running. And again, that gets you back into the full BPM life cycle of continual improvement of your business processes. So let me summarize briefly, which is that the automated process discovery is a service offered by Fujitsu. That means that we'll actually come to your site, we'll help you understand the applications that are used in a process, we'll extract the data, we'll do the correlation across the multiple databases, and we'll come back in a matter of days. We'll come back with your business processes and show you what your sunny day scenario process, and then show you a number of rainy day scenario process so that you can understand the kinds of difficult situations that your business process will also have to put up with. so we can help you to understand your best practices in this area. There is immediate return on investment here. Often the benefits can be achieved in only a few weeks of starting out. And that's a big change from expensive consulting to come in and do it in the more or less manual way. We are leveraging state-of-the-art technology. There's no agents installed in the production environment. We do collect this from applications that already exist. A number of patents are filed to cover this particular unique approach to discovering processes in the workplace without disruption to everybody there. So I think that gives you an idea of that. Interstage BPM is one piece out of the broader middleware offering from Fujitsu called Interstage. So we are in that space and offer complete service there. If you're interested in more information on Interstage products or on the automated process discovery, please use this email address or this website or phone number to contact us, and we'd be happy to see if we can help you with your problem. So with that, Greg, I think I pass it back to you.
All right, Keith, thanks. I just want to thank you for doing a great job. One of the questions we get quite a bit at the Institute are folks are always trying to figure out where they get started, how they get started, and what tools and or services are available for them to understand their processes as they currently stand before they undertake some continuous process improvement efforts. So I appreciate you coming down and sharing with us some of the capabilities. As you mentioned, this is part of the overall portfolio, but helping folks with a real pain point as they're starting to just get their BPM initiatives underway. So thanks for doing a bang-up job with that. Before you go, though, I wanted to ask you to maybe dive into a couple particular areas just as a way to recap the information we've given folks here. I did also want to mention in the promotion for today's webcast, we had mentioned that there was a free trial service available, and folks can get access to that by emailing interstage@us.fujitsu.com. And then the folks from Fujitsu will be happy to follow up with you after they receive your email. But Keith, before we split, can you recap for us, what's different about automated process discovery with Fujitsu versus the traditional discovery methods that the consulting firms are using? You can just try to encapsulate that for folks.
I can. While the biggest difference is something, and I have to apologize a little bit, is my new favorite phrase, it avoids process confabulation, and that is when you go in and you ask the people in an organization how your process works, they are only able to tell you what they think is the process and maybe not necessarily what it is. So the biggest difference is we're grabbing data that exists in your organization, correlating the data across multiple databases, and then automatically providing you the business process visualized straight out of that. And the viewer sort of works like a little explorer, so you get to explore down in there and get a sort of a feeling for what kinds of exceptions, how many exceptions there are, and how you're gonna make your process so that it behaves in a very robust manner.
All right, great. And then maybe you touched on this, during the demo and the presentation, but could you just retrace for us how is the data actually being extracted, and then what are the different ways in which folks can analyze that data?
Yeah, those are good questions. We get those questions a lot. The data can come in a variety of different forms. So I'd like to remind everybody that it being a service, it's not locked into the current capabilities. So if we have to write a small program to transform the data, we can do that. It is, in most cases, this data exists in relational databases. So by understanding the scheme of the application, we can pull that out. Some people are also, and very rightly so, concerned about keeping that information proprietary. And usually the information that we're pulling out is not does not contain proprietary information. So normally it's things like purchase order number 6 and date and time stamp that something was done, and that something is some sort of internal code key. So we extract a lot of data like that. In some cases, the correlation key itself was somewhat proprietary. You can imagine something like a Social Security number. If that's tying all the data together, you don't want to use that as a correlation key and bringing it out of sight. So in that case, we will actually sanitize the data by transferring these numbers to something else. But generally, we're extracting relational database information with timestamps in it and some sort of correlation key, and that's pretty much all we need in order to draw these diagrams that you see.
All right, great. And Keith, this question just struck me because we have a lot of folks that belong to the Institute at various levels in the organization. Could you talk a little bit to what are the types of folks that you're generally engaged with on the client side that are utilizing the product?
We've seen customers in a variety of different areas because everybody's got a business process. In some cases, there were companies selling consumer products, and they were concerned about, for example, their purchase order process, their accounting processes internally. I think I mentioned in the case studies a number of manufacturing processes, and those are important too because they're often very, very expensive, and if you can make a small improvement in them, or if you can identify a small improvement that can actually add up to a lot of money. I can give you an interesting example of some of the surprising things that happened. We worked for one insurance company, and they had a process which involved creating an interim report because they knew that the final report was going to take a while. So they created a quick report, and then that would be used for a number of things, and then later they'd follow up with the complete final report. Well, the surprising information is we found out that in some cases they were completing the final report before the interim report. And in fact, you'd think, well, once the final report's available, you're going to stop doing that other report. But there were different people involved, and they were in different parts of the office, and they didn't know about that. And so here the final report's available. They're going ahead and making the interim report. That was an easy way to get save the company a certain amount of effort right there, because as soon as the final report came out, they just made sure that people were informed about it so that they stopped working on the interim report. Things like that, it's really quite surprising to see. But anyway, back to your question, all across the board, all industries can benefit from this technique.
All right, great. And it seems to me as you were going through the demo that, that there's some other benefits that folks could get out of the process discovery service beyond the process mapping that we're covering here today. Can you talk to those a little bit?
Well, yeah, definitely true. And again, I categorize that as an understanding of what your organization is doing, which is very hard to get any other way. And it's not a single picture. It's not, here's what your organization is doing. It's more like you probe in there and you explore. It gives you a space that you can browse around in and sort of get a feeling for how often certain things happen and how often they don't happen. So it's through that understanding. I mean, any good manager is gonna know that if you have good information about how your own organization is working, you can use that information to your own benefit.
All right, great. And then the other question that folks might be wondering about, Keith, is that is the service designed exclusively for the implementation of Fujitsu's BPM suite, or can they utilize this on other platforms as well?
Yeah, you can utilize it with anything. The process discovery, it's not branded Interstage, so Interstage is our brand of middleware. But the process discovery is a separate service, and the output of that is a description of your business process and understanding your business. You can use that as an input. We do hope that you will use our BPM product because we certainly have it available, and we think it's the best out there. but you can, in fact, use it with any of the BPM products without a problem.
All right, super. Well, Keith, once again, I wanted to thank yourself and the folks from Fujitsu for coming down today and lending your expertise out to the members of our community and folks that are actively engaged in BPM initiatives. I just wanted to restate for folks that Fujitsu has been gracious enough to also extend a trial service, and you can access that by emailing Interstage at us.fujitsu.com. And Keith Swenson, Chief Architect with Fujitsu. Thank you again, Keith, for your time. Your name is familiar to a lot of the folks within our community through some activities we've done together, including a presentation you gave for us out at Brainstorm San Francisco in September,
yeah.
And also your work on WfMC's technical committee. So, Keith, thanks you very much for your time. And we encourage folks to take a look at Fujitsu's offerings in amongst the BPM space.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much, Greg.
All right. Thank you again, everybody, for attending today's webcast. We look forward to hosting you an upcoming roundtable. Thank you again for your time.